Matt Gaetz has pissed somebody off. He's pissed a few people off, I would imagine, but he has clearly royally ticked somebody off. Now, why do I say that? I say that because this meeting took place today. Now, this is a hearing on whether or not ethics panel is going to release the information on Matt Gaetz. Now, there are 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans on this panel. It breaks down like this.
Mr. Chairman, can you guys go to release this report?
As you can see, there was a lot of interest in that. And the answer was no. They did not release the ethics report. And this was the report where they were digging into whether or not Matt Gaetz had sex with a 17-year-old girl. That was the McCarthy claim, and that was what the ethics investigation was looking into. All right. Donald Trump taps him to be the AG. And so at that point, the thought was, okay, well, he's no longer under the auspices of Congress where this is an issue. But the issue now becomes, will Matt Gaetz get confirmed? Meaning, will we be able to go and get confirmed through Congress, considering this is hanging over his head? And so people wanted to know what's in the report. It's blocked. They block the report. Then the New York Times gets a leak. And the leak is the federal investigation into the allegations of sex trafficking and sex with the child, the 17-year-old. And the leak makes it very clear that Matt Gaetz is a bit of a pervert. He's a bit of a pervert. Now, I'm saying pervert because the reality of it is, it's clear that Matt Gaetz and his friends were having these sex-fueled orgies and apparently having them rather frequently and paying a fair bit of money into the $10,000 or more in these sex-fueled orgies. And the federal investigators were even able to create lines to point to where the money was going and how the money was being spent. Meaning they had the Vimeo accounts where they could identify who the money was going to. Now, each one of the little black marks are effectively pictures, but they black out the pictures. At the very top, you have Gaetz, but at that point, it's going to all of the various people. Now, some of these people are his friends. So think of it, if you're having an orgy, you have your friends with you at the sex party. And some of these people are women. Now, 2 lawyers are representing, or lawyers representing 2 of the women that are featured on this. And one of the women point out that she saw Matt Gaetz have sex with a 17-year-old. And apparently these parties were taking place over and over and over and over again. They'd get drugs, they purchase prostitutes, and they'd have sex with those prostitutes while they were high on those drugs, whatever those drugs were. All right. This gets leaked to the New York Times. Now, one of the friends of Matt Gaetz gets convicted and gets sent to prison for 11 years. That guy worked with the feds to give the goods on Gaetz also. Gaetz was not charged. The case was closed. But before the case was closed, this particular document and the information contained in the document was compiled by the federal investigators. Now, I'm going to go through some of it, but that's the bulk of the story, or that's the bulk of this part. Sex-fueled parties, orgies, Matt Gaetz paying prostitutes, and apparently having these orgies, I don't know how often, but they definitely happen several times. And paying up to $10,000 to have these orgies, or at the very least 10,000 that they know of. And they have the Vimeo accounts, the Apple Pay accounts, and so forth, and the connections to who the money was going to, because they can basically see where the money was going. One caveat: they could not see if he paid the 17-year-old. So there was none of the documentation have any lines drawn to the 17-year-old kid. It sounds like this was somewhat of a word of mouth thing more than anything else. At the end of the day, he was not charged. And fact of the matter is, it may be perfectly fine to pay people for sex, providing you can't necessarily tell that they're 17 years old. And I don't know the laws around this issue of bringing women across state lines and whether that is considered trafficking, in which case that's probably why they were investigating him for the trafficking. Again, I go back. As bad as it looks, Gaetz was not charged, despite the fact that one of his friends were put in a cage for 11 years. I would imagine that friend, there was more something concrete that they could pin on the friend as opposed to Matt Gaetz. And I'm stressing that point that he wasn't charged because I want to come back to that part. I'll put a pin in that part. I want to come back to that at the end of this because there's a larger context to what we're seeing with this story. I go back to where I was in the beginning. Somebody is very ticked off at Matt Gaetz. And so in one sense, what the Republicans can follow Trump's will of blocking it, in another sense, the people who were pissed off obviously leaked it. So this is the New York Times going through the story. It is kind of fascinating. I'm going to read a little bit of this. I'm not going to read all of it, but there are certain key points just to highlight what I mentioned before. Federal investigators have established a web of payments among Matt Gaetz and dozens of friends and associates who are said to have taken part with drug-fueled sex parties, according to a document obtained by the New York Times. Among those who received the money from Gaetz were two women who have testified that he hired them for sex, according to the document, and a lawyer for the two women. The lawyer said that the payments to the women ultimately totaled around $10,000. The documents obtained by the Times was assembled by federal investigators during a sex trafficking investigation into Mr. Gaetz, who is President Donald Trump's choice for Attorney General. It shows how Matt Gaetz and friends sent thousands of dollars through Vimeo to dozens of women who, according to testimony that is said to have given to federal and congressional investigators, were involved in sex parties from 2017 to 2020. Among those who received payments from Mr. Gaetz' friends, the document shows was another woman who, according to the people familiar with the details of the case, was 17 when she attended the parties. Matt Gaetz has vehemently denied any wrongdoing, and the federal investigation was closed by the Justice Department without any charges against Gaetz. Let's keep going. The document was obtained by the House Ethics Committee, which met on Wednesday amid growing pressure to release the report it compiled on Mr. Gaetz, but deadlocked on whether to do so. That was this.
He wants to go.
Yeah, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans ended up in a deadlock. Titled Vimeo Transactions Between All Individuals as of 9/14/20, the document uses thumbnail photographs of Mr. Gaetz, dozens of women, and several other men to show how payments flow between them. Lines with arrows connecting the men and the women, showing, among other things, how much money Mr. Gaetz and his associates paid the women. That's this chart that I showed earlier. Mr. Gaetz is at the top. And then you see all the connections between the men, women, and friends. Because the department declined to charge Mr. Gaetz with a crime, the document amassed during the investigation have remained secret, as the department almost never releases materials that law enforcement agencies developed in investigations in which no charges were brought. Basically, there were no charges. And because there were no charges, you effectively had a situation where they're like, okay, we're not going to release the information associated with this investigation because we didn't charge Gaetz with anything. At the end of the day, from their point of view, he's an innocent man. And so there's no point in releasing this information. All right, let's keep going. Right here. It says, but a copy of the chart was obtained by the House Ethics Committee during its own wide-ranging investigation into Mr. Gaetz. Skipping down a little bit. The chart does not say what the payments were for, nor does it show that Mr. Gaetz made the payment to the 19-year-old girl. But the chart shows payments the authorities believe Mr. Gaetz and his associates made to other women, including two that the lawyer said testified before the House Ethics Committee and said they had sex with Gaetz in exchange for money. Shortly after the New York Times revealed the existence of the federal sex trafficking investigation into Mr. Gaetz in 2021, it reported that investigators were focusing on Mr. Gaetz' involvement with multiple women who were recruited online for sex and how they received payments. The Times reported at the time that it had received receipts from Cash App, a mobile payment app, and Apple Pay, showing how Mr. Gaetz and Joel Greenberg, his associate and friend, had paid one of the women to have sex with him. And again, more charts. The lawyer Joel Leppert said that two women he represents testified before the House committee that Mr. Gaetz paid them in exchange for sex. One of the women said that she had witnessed Mr. Gaetz having sex with a 17-year-old girl. The chart shows that Mr. Leppert's client received $4,025, 27 cents, the other $3,500. It does not show the dates of the payments. Mr. Leppert said that the women were typically given $200 to $500 for each encounter with Gaetz. And last part, his friend Greenberg cooperated with the Justice Department in the federal investigation, telling the authorities about how he and Mr. Gaetz both had sex with the 17-year-old. But they said that Gaetz did not know she was 17, meaning they believed that she was 18 years old. It wasn't a situation where they had sex with her knowing that she was 17. It says Mr. Greenberg pleaded guilty in 2021 to an array of charges, including sex trafficking, and agreed to cooperate against Mr. Gaetz. He was later sentenced to 11 years in prison. So all of this was effectively released on Gaetz. All right. Now, obviously, this was released in order to make it difficult for Gaetz to be AG, meaning when he is going through the process, this information is going to pop up and just come to light. And while it may matter that he wasn't charged with a crime, from the standpoint of his standing, whether he wants to run for Congress or do something, this or that, it may affect whether or not the people make a decision in order to confirm him for that position. I mean, keep in mind, Gaetz stepped down in order to take this AG spot. You can't just say, okay, now I want to be a Congress member again. Can't do that. You either win it, or you're going to have to run for Congress again at some point. My point is this. This was dumped into the public sphere to muddy up Gaetz and to make it difficult for them to confirm Gaetz on the AG, meaning those senators, the congressmen that are going to have to confirm Gaetz. They are trying to make it difficult for them to make that choice to confirm, considering this information is now out in the public sphere. They tried to block it. Republicans tried to block it. But clearly somebody, and it could have been a Republican, by the way, considering what was going on with McCarthy, and many of the McCarthy allies hate Gaetz' guts. And if they could find anything on him in order to stop, hinder, incapacitate, or at the very least make him fail in whatever effort he is doing, they will do so. Keep in mind, when Gaetz was running in that most recent race, McCarthy had put a lot of money against Gaetz, or at the very least got people to have this kind of coalition to put money into his opponent in order to try to get Gaetz to lose. Gaetz ends up winning. McCarthy, once again, gets sidelined. Is this the return, though? Is this the return? The key point, beyond anything else, though, is that they didn't prosecute. And if they didn't prosecute, you have to ask yourself, well, why? Was it that Gaetz had to pull in that way? Or was it, yes, he was having sex, and yes, he might have been paying for prostitutes, but no, we don't have any smoking gun evidence that he was with the 17-year-old. There's that, especially since Gaetz is like, I didn't have anything to do with it. And apparently he didn't engage in self-snitching, sitting down, talking with the cops and basically getting himself in trouble. And so maybe they just didn't have the goods in order to get Gaetz on something that was an actual crime. Meaning, you pay for sex. Okay, fair enough. Personally, I don't think prostitution should be illegal, but whatever. Maybe you don't call it prostitution. Maybe they call it something else where they can get under the threshold for it being a crime. All right. And yeah, you're a bit of a pervert, but that's not illegal. So they couldn't get him on anything. My question, I guess, is what did the feds know that allowed them to declare him legal? I hope you understand what I mean, because it's relevant. We are seeing a portion of a report in order to make Gaetz look as bad as possible. And truth be told, I don't look, man, people can buy prostitutes. I don't really care. The trafficking thing is a whole different story in regards to whether it's a crime or not. From my point of view, people could be perverts. God bless them if that's what they want to do. And I don't even care if they're doing drugs. God bless them for that too. If you want to have drug-fueled sex parties, have fun. Are we seeing a version of this? I guess that will be my question. Because obviously it's leaked in order to hurt Gaetz. So is there a certain spin on it? Is there information that the feds had that we are not seeing in this that gave them a reason to clear Gaetz in a way that is not being elucidated to us? Because that wasn't the point of this being released. The point of this being released was to damage Gaetz politically, so they can't necessarily confirm him as an AG. By the same token, if the feds didn't prosecute, there had to be a reason why the feds didn't prosecute. And I'm curious on what that reason is. If it boils down to Gaetz' behavior might have been somewhat atrocious, but it wasn't necessarily illegal, well, then that becomes a political issue about whether they want to confirm or not. But either way, the entire point of this document being dropped into the public sphere in this way is to do what it is doing now, to be on the pages of the New York Times and to be something to discuss and to inhibit confirmation of Matt Gaetz. One more interesting point for this. When Gaetz goes to be confirmed, he is going to have to be under oath. So you go, you sit down, and you ask questions. And you can imagine that one of those questions might be, did you have sex with a 17-year-old girl? Did you knowingly have sex with a 17-year-old girl? Did you pay for sex with what you ended up knowing was a 17-year-old girl? Meaning, he can be asked questions in this sphere in a way that would be legally or politically damaging to Matt Gaetz. And if Matt Gaetz sits there and says, I plead the fifth, that would be as bad as an admission of guilt. Meaning they have complicated Matt Gaetz' life now in regards to going through these Senate hearings. Because A, he's going to be under oath. B, if you are under oath and you lie to Congress, you can be prosecuted if they know and find out that you were lying to Congress. Hell, if they start asking Gaetz questions like, did you pay for sex? Were you buying prostitutes? Did you transport those prostitutes across state lines? Like, imagine some of the things that you could effectively ask Gaetz while he is under oath during the confirmation hearing that would be very difficult for Gaetz to answer and maybe legally treacherous for him to answer. So I guess the question is, have they effectively ended Matt Gaetz' ability to get confirmed for the AG? I have no idea. I don't have an answer for that question. I mean, it's very possible that Donald Trump could go in and bully the various members and be like, look, I want him confirmed, full stop. This is my pick. This is the guy that I want. And Trump has enough political gravitas in order to kind of give him over the finish line. I don't know if it's going to work that way. Again, Matt Gaetz has made enemies in Congress. And because he has made enemies in Congress, this may be a situation where Donald Trump doesn't get what he wants. This is a kind of wait and see thing. I don't know. I don't have a feeling one way or the other about it, to be honest. This is more inside Republican baseball more than anything else. And this is kind of internal to the Republican Party in regards to what they end up doing. We will see whether Donald Trump has the heft in order to get his man over the finish line, or whether or not this is so damaging that it fundamentally kills Matt Gaetz' campaign. Jiho Choi, dude, age of consent in Florida is 18 years old. I know, but the girl was 17. The girl was 17. That's the issue. The age of consent in New Jersey is 16. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You must understand, from the standpoint of the way we look at it in culture in general in the United States, 18 years old is the age of consent. Anything below 18 years old is a child. And Matt Gaetz at the time was in his 30s. I think Matt Gaetz is like 41, 42 years old now. At the time he was in his 30s, the girl was 17 years old. He was literally twice her age. And in any situation that will come across as either grooming or basically having sex with a minor and paying for it, no less. So that's the issue. Even if the age of consent in Florida was 17, he would be cleared legally. But legal clearing is different than having to go through a political hearing where they're going to be asking you questions on it and they're going to feel some kind of way depending upon the answers that you give to those questions. Again, this is not a legal issue anymore. That case is closed legally. His issue is now trying to get confirmed, knowing this information is in the public sphere. And again, there is, I would argue, some legal issue associated with it, since he's going to have to sit there under questioning, under oath, and answer questions potentially on this very issue. And again, if Matt Gaetz is asked something that they can prove is true, and he answers false because it's humiliating, or for that matter, politically damaging, well, Matt Gaetz may be in legal trouble if they catch him lying to Congress. So again, if he has to sit there and plead the fifth, that is going to look as bad as him basically giving the answer that would have been damaging to him anyway. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I mean, this is kind of a wait and see thing, right? I mean, many of Trump's picks are somewhat dubious. I mean, Hegeseth, sexual assault claims have been coming out with him also. So Donald Trump has picked some oddballs for some of these positions. And I get the sense that the Republican Party, all things being equal, want to confirm Trump's picks and want to get those picks over the finish line because Trump won. He won with the popular vote. First time a Republican have done that back in 2004. So from their point of view, he has a mandate. They want him to be able to fulfill that mandate. And look, part of what Trump wants to do is shake things up. I got to be honest, the freaking out by liberals over some of these picks, I actually like. It's not that I like the picks. I just like them freaking out. I think the American public wants this stuff to be shaken up. They feel that it's too ossified and it doesn't necessarily serve or represent their interests. Putting RFK Jr. in Healthy Human Services, for example, is freaking out certain companies, food companies, even certain drug companies, because RFK doesn't trust them and he wants to function to the best interest of Americans' health, which is different than their objectives of maximizing profit, meaning he wants the organization to function in the way that it's supposed to function, not necessarily at the behest of corporations. They're freaking out over that choice. I'm fine with them freaking out over that choice. Whether Gaetz can get over the finish line is a different question. Like I said, Gaetz has enemies. Gaetz has enemies. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. I'm going to try to get a few hours of sleep before the show starts. 7 a.m. Monday through Friday. Back in a moment. Have a good one all. See you in a few.